The presentation for this session is being presented by Kate Higginbottom and I believe Karl Risser as well, yes? Kate Higginbottom joined the International Transport Workers Federation, the ITF, in their Seafarers section in 2005, having earlier had a career in international publishing. She played an active role in the ITF delegation to the ILO, the International Labour Organisation, for negotiations and adoption of the Maritime Labour Convention in 2006, the MLC. I hope you're keeping up with all these. She was responsible for training the ITF inspectorate on the MLC and for monitoring its practical applications. She has worked extensively with maritime unions in the Black Sea region, East and West Africa and Myanmar. Katie took up the role of head of ITF Seafarers Trust in July 2018. Since then, she has actively expanded the Trust's reach through her relations with maritime unions around the world and sought to increase the impact of the Trust's work through close collaboration with the ITF and with many organisations addressing the welfare and well-being of seafarers. And I believe Katie will be joined in this presentation by Karl Risser, who's the ITF inspector with the International Transport Workers Federation here in Canada. So, please.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I feel completely like a fish out of water. This is entirely not my world, so a bit of an imposter. But it's absolutely fascinating. So I feel really privileged and very grateful to have been given this opportunity. So I'm going to jump straight in, but no, I'm not. I'm going to ask advice on how to continue my thing. Is it this one? Am I doing the right thing? Do I press that? Okay. So, at the end of the 19th century, when fabulous wealth was being created by merchants and capitalists, seafarers and dockers were struggling to survive on pitiful wages and in dismal working conditions. Havelock Wilson, leader of the National Amalgamated Sailors and Firemen's Union of Great Britain and Ireland, arrived in Rotterdam in 1896 when the whole port was on strike and the military had been called in. The largest employer in the port was planning to impose a wage cut of 25%. Wilson found 40 British ships caught up in the dispute and visited every vessel by steamship. That night, 600 seafarers and striking dockers met and resolved to refuse to discharge cargoes until the strike was over. The headline of the Seaman's Chronicle of Saturday, May 23rd, 1896, read, "Great strike of dockers at Rotterdam. Dockers win splendid victory." In the summer of the same year, the International Socialist Trade Union Congress took place in London, presenting a great opportunity to hold an international conference of the seamen. Wilson, together with other leading lights of the movement, established the International Federation of Dock and River Workers and invited their European counterparts from Rotterdam, Antwerp, Hamburg, France, Sweden and New York to join an international meeting at the Cranbourne Hotel in Charing Cross. 2 days later, a second meeting received reports from 87 ports in Europe, and demands were drawn up to present to shipping and port employers. The order to our men is prepare for action, for there is no knowing what hour the capitalists of the shipping industries may open fire. Let them, but remember through it all, our whole fight is not to fight down capitalists, but to raise the standards of workers. And if the latter be done by peaceful means, so much the better, say we. If the employers, by their stubborn refusal to negotiate, compel rougher work, then on their heads will rest the responsibility. In 1898, the Federation became known by its current name, the International Transport Workers Federation, the ITF. The next few decades were turbulent, with 2 world wars forcing the organization into underground networks bound by anti-fascist ideology. The Cold War period created more challenges, with fractures over unions' differing stands on communism. And in 1944, the ITF Seafarers Charter was published in 17 languages, and 4 years later, the campaign against flags of convenience was launched. While shipping had always been a global trade, employing to some extent an international workforce, the rise of open registries allowed the severing of connections between beneficial owners of vessels and the people employed to work on them. So at the core of the ITF's work in maritime is an attempt to protect and improve conditions for seafarers on these vessels, which it does in 2 ways. On the one hand, through the development of international conventions representing seafarers at the International Labour Organization, and on the other hand, through negotiations with ship owners to cover seafarers with collective bargaining agreements. 1950 saw the creation of the Special Seafarers Department of the ITF, and in 1971, the first ITF inspectors were appointed in Australia, Finland, Italy, Great Britain, and the USA. The signing of collective bargaining agreements allowed the ITF to collect contributions from employers for a welfare fund, and the inspectorate was created to police the agreements, call out substandard shipping, and protect seafarers' rights. The ITF Seafarers Trust was set up as a charity funded by, but independent of the ITF in 1981. Since the early days of the ITF, much has changed and much has stayed the same. Technology has moved on apace, but the forces of globalization and capitalism still hold sway with very modest levels of restraint and regulation. The ITF Inspectorate now number 125 inspectors in 101 ports in 50 countries. In 2021, they carried out 7,265 inspections, dealing with issues from non-payment of wages to repatriation and abandonment. And in 2021, the Inspectorate recovered $37.5 million in unpaid wages, which is money that should have been paid by the ship owners to the seafarers in that year, and that's the kind of normal kind of a figure that they recover. So now I'm going to hand over to my partner, Karl Risser, ITF Inspector for Halifax, and he's going to give you a bit of a frontline perspective on challenges facing today's seafarers. And then I'm going to come back to you and talk a bit about the project we're bringing to you here, which is to share photography from seafarers and bring their stories a bit closer to a wider audience. So let me hand over to Karl.
Like Katie, I'm a fish out of water too. But first of all, I'd like to thank Katie for inviting me here today and to the important work that she does on behalf of the Trust in dispersing the funds. Whether it's sponsoring Ukrainian cadets so they can finish their work cadetship when their country's at war, or sponsoring our local mission here in Halifax, making sure that the seafarers have Wi-Fi and a van to transport them from the ship to the mission. And I'd like to thank all of you for allowing me to talk to you about the challenges that are faced by seafarers. You guys are a unique group of people who value the heritage of our maritime industries. A little about me: both my father and my grandfather worked at the Halifax shipyard as ship fitters, and I followed along. I found a real love for shipbuilding and ship repair. Before too long, though, I got bit by a bug of representing workers and became the local president at the Halifax shipyard. It was an exciting time. We were going through cycles of bang and bust, and we won the largest procurement contract in Canada's history in the National Shipbuilding Procurement Strategy. This is when I had my first experience with seafarers. We'd lifted a ship out of the water to do a refit, and there was a lot of mackerel that were left on the dock. So down came the ship's cook to collect them up. I noticed that the ship's cook was not dressed for the Canadian winter, and I was wondering what he was going to do with those fish. So I soon learned that the supplies on board the ship were low, and they weren't properly prepared for the Canadian winter. So we went around the yard and we collected up what the crew needed for their stay in the shipyard. Then, 7 years ago, I joined the ITF Inspectors Group and now work full-time in our ports representing seafarers that visit our country from around the world. During this time, I've met crews that have been abandoned by their owners, seafarers who have worked 9 to 14 months only to be told that they can't go home, seafarers isolated and denied shore leave, seafarers without internet connectivity to the world around them. They become marginalized. They create issues of mental health and even suicide. But despite the hardship, they do find camaraderie at sea. And as a maritime worker, I look at these pictures and they really do speak 1,000 words. It's a story that's not often told and is more often forgotten. In closing, on July 5th, I was contacted by Ukrainian seafarers whose employer had failed to send them home at the end of their contract. They had worked 6 months and were asked to extend for another month and then to the next port, and then another month to the next port. And by the time they got to Canada, they were losing hope. Working with the Canadian authorities, we were able to get that owner to send those seafarers home right here in Halifax. It was a big win for us. Growing up in Halifax and coming from the shipyard, I always had a lot of joy when I visited the Maritime Museum and saw the exhibitions that started in the time of sail. And I think that the exhibition could include a place for the stories of modern day seafarers. So I encourage everyone here to work with the Trust and Katie to bring those forward to the public. So thank you.
Thank you, Karl. So seafarers were dramatically impacted by the COVID pandemic. The closing of borders and the restrictions on travel. The Seafarers Trust was swift to provide emergency grants for seafarers and their families, but we also launched a photography competition, Still at Sea, aimed to capture the experiences of seafarers caught up in what was to become known as the crew change crisis. The response was phenomenal. We thought we were doing a kind of fun recreational activity, and we ended up with this extraordinary archive of social history. So we've now just closed our third competition, Life at Sea 2022, submissions from which you've seen through this presentation. And we intend to make this competition an annual event. It gives us a sense of what seafarers are thinking and a bit of the kind of mood of the industry. It's clear that seafarers are the ultimate invisible workforce, keeping global supply chains moving through the most dramatic of events. Many come from countries facing enormous challenges: a military junta in Myanmar, war in Ukraine, economic and political collapse in Sri Lanka. In the Philippines, still the largest source of seafarers, the wages of one seafarer often support up to 15 family members. It's a huge responsibility, and so it's not surprising to see references to both pride and sacrifice. Since the COVID lockdown, all of us are a bit more familiar with enforced isolation, but for us it was temporary, not so much for seafarers, especially with ongoing restrictions on shore leave and frequently extended contracts. So we're really pleased to have the opportunity to present to you here and explore possibilities of reaching a wider audience with our seafarers' photos. We think it's a remarkable resource, providing an unfiltered connection with seafarers around the world. And in our experience, the seafarers are genuinely delighted to have the recognition and for once some visibility. So if you would be interested in curating an exhibition that brings contemporary seafarers into the room, as it were, please do talk to us this week. We've had the pleasure of already collaring quite a few of you, but please carry on those conversations. And anyone who hasn't caught us or spoken to us before, then we'd be really pleased to talk about possibilities. We're very flexible. We see it as a kind of, as a raw resource that with your expertise, you could convert into quite bespoke, interesting collections to enhance your own strategies and ideas for engaging with your audiences. And also, as you see from Karl, we've got inspectors in lots of ports around the world, so they may be able to support exhibitions and provide talks or engagement with your public as well. So we're really well connected. We've got this huge network of unions, we've got some direct contacts with seafarers, and we've got this database behind this photo archive, so we could even follow up with individual seafarers who've submitted photographs and do further videos or whatever it is that might work for you. So, thanks.
I have to admit that I can see the screen here with what the speaker's seeing, and when I looked down and Katie was 5 minutes into a presentation going through the history of the Union, and it said on there, we're up to slide 2 of 94, I thought this could get interesting. All was revealed. So can you please join me in thanking Katie and Karl, and also thanking all our speakers for what's been a fabulous session. Thank you.